Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and in today's video we are going to have a look at the Autoland in the Airbus A350. And it is really worth pointing out that iniBuild's have done an excellent job on it, and the plane really lands itself really nice. So let's get into it and start with a little bit of basics. The first question is, when do we actually need to do an Autoland? And the answer is not just bad weather. So generally, you can do a manual landing of any non-precision approach and an ILS Category 1 approach. A Cat 2 and Cat 3 approach, however, is different and requires automatic landings. The reason is that the visibility is so bad in these cases that a human pilot would not be able to properly judge the height and therefore conduct a safe landing and eventually maintain the aircraft on the center line. So let's have a look at an example. We're approaching Munich, runway 26 left today, and we can see very typical landing minima on the ILS chart today. So we do have our standard non-precision approach, such as the localizer approach up here, which has the minimum at 410 feet above the ground and requires a visibility of 1,200 meters. Then we have the ILS Cat 1. That's the approach that is flown in the vast majority of cases when you do an ILS and complete a manual landing. You will notice that you require the ceiling above 200 feet with a visibility of 550 meters, and that equals a barometric minimum of 1670. Note that I emphasize barometric over here because that comes from your altimeter. Now we're moving on to the Autoland relevant scenarios, and that's the Category 2 ILS and the Category 3 ILS. And just to mention it, you can conduct an Autoland from a GLS approach as well, though it's not certified just yet. So let's have a look at the two different categories of approaches relevant for an Autoland. That's Cat 2 and Cat 3. A Category 2 approach is defined with a minimum at least 100 feet above the ground and 200 meters RVR. And you can see in this case that equals 106 feet RA, radio altimeter. So for an Autoland you would enter the minimum down here on the radio section. And if you're wondering now, I just said the minimum is 100 feet above the runway. Why is it 106 radio? That's quite simple. The area over which you're approaching might not be completely flat, therefore 106 radio equals 100 feet above the runway. And now we come to the interesting approach. That's the Cat 3 approach. And you can see the minimum is company dependent over here. It can be certified all the way down to 0 feet decision height, so no decision height at all, and 75 meters RVR. That's the minimum required. And the company is then going to define which minimum you have to use. For instance, some companies may only be certified down to a 50-foot minimum. In that case, you'd have to enter 50 feet. Many companies, however, are certified for no decision height at all. In that case, you simply enter no into the radio field and then it inserts no DH, and you can see that up here on the FMA as well. So no decision height literally means you don't have to see the runway all the way to your touchdown. All you have to have is 75 meters RVR, which is pretty much nothing, considering that you're moving at 140 knots. Now, from here, let's go on into a little bit of systematic explanations, because even though you don't have a minimum on this approach, you still have a certain height above which you gotta conduct a couple checks, and where you also got to make the famous continue call, and that's the alert height. Now, what is the alert height concept about? Basically, on an aircraft that's equipped with a fail operational Autoland system, that is the case for the A350, it has a fail operational Autoland system, you are able to continue the approach in case of any given failure below a certain height, and that's the alert height. Typically, the alert height is located at 200 feet above the runway, and therefore, if any failure happens below 200 feet, continue the approach to landing. If it happens above 200 feet, go around, come back as needed after conducting your non-normal checklists, whatever you have to do. Now, in order for the monitoring of the alert height, you do have the Autoland light. let's go ahead and turn on the annunciator light test. We can see that red Autoland light up here. Remember, I just said the alert height is typically 200 feet. So once you are below 200, if a failure occurs that prevents a successful automatic landing, the Autoland light is going to illuminate, and then you have to conduct a go-around. So let's talk about the conditions for the Autoland warning to illuminate. So at least one autopilot is engaged below 200 feet radio with localizer and glide slope armed, or with localizer, glide slope, land or flare mode engaged, and the radio altimeter indications differ by more than 15 feet. In that case, the airplane is no longer capable of conducting an autoland. Or at least one autopilot is engaged below 200 feet radio altitude with land or flare mode engaged, and one of the following conditions occur. The last autopilot disengages, with emphasis on the word last, because the airplane can autoland with just a single autopilot engaged. The aircraft excessively deviates from the ILS beams, or the ILS signal is lost, or a long flare, which is 1000 meters with flare mode engaged, is detected, or a too early flare, where flare engages less than 2 seconds after land mode engagement is detected. Note, localizer deviations of 1/4 of a dot above 15 feet radio altitude, or a glide slope deviation of 1 dot above 100 feet radio altitude is going to trigger the Autoland warning, and a localizer signal is lost above 15 feet radio altitude, or glide slope signal is lost above 100 feet radio altitude, which triggers the flight director bars to flash on the primary flight display, and if land mode remains engaged is also going to trigger the Autoland warning. So those are the conditions that can trigger the Autoland warning. If that comes on and the mode is only armed below 200 feet, go around. Likewise, if a failure occurs above the alert height, go around. Now, let's take a short moment to discuss how the aircraft actually conducts the automatic landing, and to understand what the computers are doing. Basically, when you fly the approach, you are eventually going to receive the land mode at 350 feet radio altitude, and if land mode does not engage, then Autoland is not authorized. Now, at 50 feet, flare mode is going to engage, and again, if flare mode doesn't come on, go around. Now, let's talk a little bit about the procedure itself. So, of course, you've got two pilots in there, and they have very different tasks during an autoland. So the captain is normally going to position himself a little bit upwards so that you have better visibility to the ground, so that you can see the lights of the runway earlier, while the first officer is normally going to stay right down on the instruments and not look out at all. So the first officer is just going to monitor your primary flight display and the other displays and verify correct operation of the system. Since the captain is only looking outside, not looking inside at all, the first officer has to take over the respective FMA calls. Most importantly, the last call from the captain is going to be land, when the land FMA comes on at 350 feet, and thereafter the first officer has to do the flare and the rollout calls, confirming to the captain who's looking outside that the aircraft is going to initiate the flare automatically, and that the rollout mode has engaged, and so that the aircraft is going to track the center line. Now, as mentioned, the Autoland can be performed of an ILS or a GLS approach. So let's take a quick moment to understand how it works technically. The type of the approach only has to be accurate enough that the aircraft is guided down properly into the touchdown zone. The Autoland itself is conducted based on the radio altimeter. So the aircraft simply uses whatever approach you use to guide itself down to a proper height above the runway threshold, typically 50 feet, and the localizer in order to maintain the center line. Those can be replaced with an GLS, just saying. And then the entire flare mode is based off the radio altimeter. That's why the Autoland light comes on if you have more than 15 feet difference between the two radio altimeter readings. Well, and then the airplane is going to settle itself down based on the radio altimeter data, and then going to use the localizer in order to maintain the runway centerline, respectively the GLS data to maintain the runway centerline. And that's the basics of how the approach is conducted. So let's go ahead and have a look into the SOP flying an approach like this. So let's get ourselves out of active pause. We have been cleared for the ILS, and with that we can arm approach mode and engage both autopilots. So just to show you, if you only have a single autopilot on, you get land 3 single showing up here on the FMA. Land 3 single tells you you are not conducting fail operational operations, but you are fail passive at that moment. Meaning any single one failure will lead to the system disengaging and handing the aircraft over in a trimmed state so that the pilot has to conduct the go-around. Once we engage the second autopilot, we are going to get land 3 dual. And with land 3 dual, the aircraft is now in a fail operational mode and can now conduct the landing down to no decision height. So for the approach itself, since we are typically conducting an automatic landing in IMC, the stabilized approach gate is at 1000 feet. And to simplify things, it's been defined that for any automatic landing, the stable approach gate 1000 feet. You don't use the 500-foot gate in VMC when doing an auto land. It is recommended that you stabilize the approach a little bit earlier already so that you're stable before 1000. Let's go ahead and do that right now. The glide slope is approaching, so we're going to get the flaps out. And it is recommended that you follow standard operating procedures on the approach. So gear down, flaps 2 at the 2 marker on the PFD, respectively 2500 the latest, and then you configure the aircraft all the way, complete the landing checklist. Everything has to be done by 1000 feet. However, it is worth mentioning that you can not only conduct automatic landings in bad weather conditions. Automatic landings are also conducted for several different purposes in better weather conditions than, 300 meters or below 550 meters RVR. Basically, those approaches are conducted either for checking purposes, so if some equipment in the aircraft was damaged or broke and had to be replaced by maintenance, then you may have to demonstrate an automatic landing after that. So in those cases, you would do an automatic landing in Cat 1 or better conditions, and then just verify that the aircraft does everything correctly. Alright, gear down, flaps 2. Another scenario where Autoland are recommended by Airbus is in case of an engine failure. So they do recommend that you do an automatic landing in an engine out situation. That's in order to relieve the crew and increase the monitoring capacity of the 2 pilots. Pretty smart, actually. Now, there is one more situation in which an autoland is recommendable, and that's in case of a pilot incapacitation. Because in that case, you will already be under a huge amount of stress, and then you have to land the airplane without any backup? No, maybe not that advisable. So conducting an automatic landing in that case is actually advisable, so that you can just sit back a little bit and monitor the airplane, monitor everything happen automatically. Highly recommended, but not required. So up to the remaining pilot to decide. But under these situations, in my opinion, safety always comes first. So yeah, forget about doing that landing yourself. Have the airplane land itself. Well, and that's about everything there is. So let's recap the most important things. We gotta be stabilized with the landing checklist completed, which we assume to be completed at the moment, at 1000 feet above the field. Remember, radio altimeter must not always show you the exact elevation above the field. If you're approaching over hilly terrain, may be different. So always a good idea to check that on the primary altimeter, on the barometric altimeter. So Munich field elevation, we have that on the chart over here, roughly 1500, so at 2500 we want to be stabilized. At 350 feet, land mode is going to come on. At 200 feet radio, you are going to call continue for the alert height. So verifying that you have not had any failure that's preventing the automatic landing. So at the alert height, 200 feet RA, continue. And then as captain, you're basically just looking outside and looking for the runway lights. As first officer, you're looking down here, verify that flare mode comes on, and once we touch down, rollout mode comes on. And that's everything there is to it. So let's go ahead and have a look at how the aircraft is going to conduct the approach. One small caveat in flight simulation, not all ILSs are entirely accurate, therefore it may happen that Autoland flies you into nirvana. Well, welcome to flight simulation. FS 2024 is a lot better than 2020 in these regards, but still not perfect. So here we go, land.
300.
We're approaching 200.
200.
Continue. That's the alert height. Now the Autoland light is armed. If any failure occurs that prevents an auto landing, we get the red flashing Autoland warning in front of us.
100.
Next we're looking for flare mode at 50.
40.
Here we go. Flare.
30. 20.
Retard.
10.
Idle at 10. Touchdown. Remember, you still have to activate the reversers. And then we verify rollout mode, which keeps us on the center line. And that's exactly how an Autoland is conducted. No paperwork on low visibility taxi, by the way, so do have a good look at your charts and then just follow along. 70 knots, back to idle reverse, and once we're ready to take over to vacate the runway, that's it, my friends. That's how you conduct an automatic landing on the Airbus A350. I hope you found this one interesting. Be sure to leave your comments in the comment section underneath the video. I'm very much looking forward to them. Let me know if you've already conducted Autolands and how well they went. And with that out of the way, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. Leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video, like, comment and subscribe. And if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.